We're into the final week of the election campaign, and this morning we're in the marginal Victorian seat of McEwan. This is exactly the sort of seat Peter Dutton needs to win if government's going to change hands. We've come here to test the mood as this contest enters its most critical phase. Live from Hanging Rock, I'm David Speers. Welcome to Insiders. It's been fascinating to spend the last couple of days here in McEwan, and this morning we'll show you what some of the locals here have to say about both Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton. It's a seat that stretches from Melbourne's outer suburbs into these beautiful regional towns like Whittlesea, Woodend and Mount Macedon. Labor's held this seat since 2010, and at the last election it won with a margin of just over 3%. Peter Dutton's been here several times during the campaign. His promise to cut fuel excise is really aimed at commuters in seats like this. But is it enough? The national polls continue to show the coalition is struggling, despite its late rush of policy promises, including on defence. With just 6 days to go, Labor remains on track to win.
One down, 13,500,024 to go.
Thousands of voters started casting their ballots.
An increasing number of Aussies choose to cast their vote before election day.
Motivations differed.
I'm going overseas.
We've already made up our minds.
Get it over and done with.
The most exciting part of the day.
Always. Okay, I'm going with you guys.
Peter Dutton has announced he'll dramatically boost defence spending,
promising $21 billion over 5 years.
So that it's 2.5% of GDP. Then plans for it to be 3% within a decade, which is in line with the Trump's administration target.
A good Australian government will always invest into keeping us safe.
No specifics on what the extra billions will buy, but it is clear on the why.
America is moving to an America First posture. We still have a strong relationship with the United States, but we can't take anything for granted.
They have not given any explanation here. No explanation of how the money is being raised. There's no explanation of where the money is being spent.
It would have been imprudent for us to announce early on without knowing the bottom line.
He is unable to say where the money would come from, except for confirming that they will put up income taxes.
We are taking the hard decisions to get Australia back on track. We will be stronger for it.
So come in for our obligatory photo here.
Another dramatic backflip from the coalition, this time over electric vehicles.
No, there's no change to the policy, and no, we've been very clear.
They were against tax support on EVs.
No policy change, no discussion about that policy this week.
Then they were for the measure.
I answered the question in relation to the ute tax.
Would a coalition government repeal the EV tax break?
No, I want people to have choice. If people want to buy an EV, that's fantastic.
And now they're against it again.
The whole conspiracy about whether there's been a change of policy this week, it's just wrong.
For goodness sake.
Thank you, sir.
What's the worst moment of this campaign so far?
Oh, probably falling off the stage.
Prime Minister, you said this morning at the breakfast event that falling off the stage had been the worst moment of the campaign for you when you were in the Utter Valley.
It was a joke. It was a joke. Chill out. I stepped off the stage. I didn't fall over on my backside.
With Labor ahead in the polls,
Peter Dutton has a bit of work ahead of him to be the one
Cheers.
Thank you. To taste victory.
I think this election is going to be decided this week.
This campaign has exposed the coalition as not being ready for government. They're a shambles.
I think he's taking it for granted. I think there is a lot of anger in the suburbs.
Big smiles.
Go with that brush.
We're done.
And a reminder, we're running extended 90-minute shows during the campaign. My guests this morning are the Health Minister, Mark Butler, and the Shadow Transport Minister, Bridget Mckenzie. First, let's check what's making news. Pope Francis has been laid to rest after a funeral at the Vatican. Less grand than those for some of his predecessors. More than 250,000 people joined dozens of world leaders in St Peter's Square to pay their respects. And ahead of the funeral, Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky met for about 15 minutes to discuss a potential ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. It was the first meeting since the pair clashed in the Oval Office back in February. The White House says it was a very productive discussion. Volodymyr Zelensky says it was a very symbolic meeting and has the potential to become an historic moment. Well, back here, Labor is promising a revamped health hotline if re-elected. From next year, 1-800 Medicare would give Australians access to a 24/7 free healthcare advice line. This could include after-hours bulk billed telehealth consultations with a GP for those who need it. And finally, Peter Dutton has spoken to News Corp papers, admitting he has made mistakes in the campaign but can still win this election. He plans to blitz up to 28 seats before Saturday, including the so-called teal seats. In fact, I'm told he'll visit one of them in Sydney later today before the final debate tonight. Well, both leaders will no doubt be back here in McEwan over the next few days. It's going to be a frantic final stretch and we'll see lots of negative ads too. The published polls and the betting markets are still pointing to Anthony Albanese being returned, either in minority or even a majority government. Labor, though, is remaining cautious, worried about a cost of living backlash that could still bite them in seats like this one. Liberal insiders, meanwhile, say their internal polling is better than the published polls, pointing to a hung parliament as the most likely outcome. Of course, to have any chance, Peter Dutton needs everything to go right from here. A week that's free of policy missteps and undecided voters breaking his way at the end. Let's bring in the panel to see what they make of it. And joining me here at Hanging Rock, Bridget Brennan, Jason Koutsoukis and Anna Henderson. Great to have you all here on a chilly morning, although I think I'm rugged up more than the rest of you. Bridget, let's start with you because we're on your country here. Tell us a bit about this place.
Yeah, we're at the intersection of 3 different mobs here at Hanging Rock, which is a really sacred place for Aboriginal Victorians. So we're on Dja Dja Wurrung country, which is my people, Tanarung country and Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung country here as well. So yeah, it is a beautiful spot. It's a beautiful seat to be in McEwan. Once upon a time, most of this seat would have been considered by Victorians country Victoria, but of course, as Melbourne grows, part of this seat is now described as peri-urban. You've got a lot of people in this seat. I've got friends and family here commuting into Melbourne, which is possible now. A lot of people who've moved here post-pandemic to raise their families as well, because they can work from home, of course, which has been a feature of the campaign. It's absolutely stunning. It's such a beautiful part of the world. The environment is really, really crucial here as well. As you can see behind us, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous part of Australia. So look, there are just a lot of issues, I think, facing families here. And as I say, a lot of people have moved here to start their new lives in a different part of Victoria.
Yeah, and have a wonderful lifestyle, and great to be here at such a significant site as well. Jason, you actually grew up, went to school in this electorate. Maybe that explains why you're not as rugged up as I am. But tell us about the politics of this seat.
Well, I think, David, it is exactly the kind of seat, as you said in your introduction, that Peter Dutton needs to win and can win with the sort of policies that he's been pitching, especially the fuel excise policy. And we saw a lot of branding for that policy at the polling booth that we visited yesterday, and I think this does give Peter Dutton a bit of a chance here to sort of appeal to those commuters who will really benefit from that sort of policy. This is, of course, a very mixed electorate, though. There's a lot of different pockets of people here and different demographics, so I think there's opportunities definitely for both sides of of politics here, and it's possible, I think, that that Labor can hang on, just as Peter Dutton can.
Yeah, look, I think the coalition's pretty confident they will pick this up. We'll see. We'll know in a week's time. Anna, you've spent time here yesterday talking to locals. What did you pick up?
I mean, it feels like a bit of an electorate somewhat under construction in those areas that are the more peri-urban areas, but there's a lot of growing pains, and I think that's led to a lot of disappointment in the communities. And they don't necessarily differentiate between issues for different layers of government in a federal campaign. They were just as exercised about, potholes as they were when I was speaking to community members yesterday about the lack of telecommunications, the lack of public transport, just the lack of development planning that's occurred. So people making deals to go out through developments to go live in places, but then not having a petrol station for potentially more than a year or so that's less than a half an hour drive. And if you add traffic into that, some people were telling me yesterday that they were driving last year sort of an hour to go and get petrol to come home again. That's just to fill up the tank. That's not even to actually get to work or do anything else they need to do, or even have a supermarket close by. So it's that sense of, I think what's been picked up in the polling, of that forgotten community, or the community that feels sort of left behind, like they've been parked in these suburbs and not had a chance to live the same kind of life that they would have lived when they were renting further in. They thought they were buying a sort of better life. One of the comments that's really stuck with me is the sense of there's the new Australia in those suburbs, and the new Australia feels forgotten. And a lot of migrant communities have decided to, in quite big numbers, move to these areas because they're more affordable. It's not a protest vote, you know, we need to kick Labor out feeling, but certainly a sense of disappointment. And what's the government doing for us?
Yeah, that's interesting. So, look, I visited different parts of the electorate over the last couple of days. I want to show you what I picked up. Firstly, with Anthony Albanese, what people were feeling about the Prime Minister. So what do you think of Anthony Albanese?
I don't like him. In the first instance, I thought he was a numpty because of the way he speaks.
He's all right. He's good for our future, actually.
You'll stick with Labor this time?
Yes.
My husband and I went to go back to the UK and live for 3 or 4 years. He's impressed me.
And why is that?
He just seems to have substance.
How would you describe him?
You won't swear, or?
Yeah.
Nah.
Don't like him.
No, why not?
He lies. I really do believe he's lying.
He's a liar.
What do you think of Anthony Albanese?
Honestly, I think they've done enough.
Embarrassing to say, I don't even know who he is.
You don't know who Anthony Albanese is?
I don't. Sorry.
Do you know who Peter Dutton is?
No.
I would not vote for Albanese because he's been in power for about 3 or 4 years, and we've not improved in that time.
So not a lot of love for Anthony Albanese necessarily, but also not a lot of love, it turns out, for Peter Dutton. So what do you think of Peter Dutton then?
No respect. Well, he's an unknown quantity. So
it might be a better option, do you think?
I think it probably would be, yes.
I haven't really connected with him. I don't know. I think some of his ideas seem a little bit kind of on the extreme side, I think.
What about Peter Dutton? What do you think of him?
I don't agree with most of the policy he follows. So, yeah, that's why.
Yeah, and why is that? Is there anything in particular that's a turn-off?
I think most of the opinion is extreme.
It's like a plastic man.
I like him.
Yeah, why is that?
I like his policies, but I can see why he may not be appealing to people, women, I don't know.
What about Peter Dutton? How do you describe him?
Yeah, I reckon he's a wanker.
Some blunt assessments from the people of McEwan, and then there are those who simply can't cop either party or are looking for someone else.
Both of them. I mean, I really don't like them, and I've sort of never felt like that before. So is there someone else out there?
I'm not a massive fan, really. I'm more, like I'd rather just be part of the, Hunters, Farmers, Fishers party if they'd ever get in, but they probably won't.
I don't like any of the big guys, right? You know who I love? Senator Rennick. Fantastic guy.
Why is that?
Just all the stuff that he's bringing out about COVID.
What about Clive Palmer?
No, unfortunately, he could have potential, but he works for himself. And you see him at election time and then you never see him again.
And look, so there's some of the views. A lot of people speaking off camera as well. They didn't want to go on camera. And similar sort of mixed sentiment. And I think it is probably quite reflective of what we're seeing around the country, right? People aren't all that thrilled with the choice on offer between Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton. I wouldn't say the baseball bats are out for the Albanese government for Labor. But Jason, you and I spent some time on the one of the early voting booths yesterday. Here in McEwan as well. A lot of volunteers for all the parties out there. It was great to catch up with all of them. Took a lot of photos too with all of the people handing out their how to votes. But what did you make of it?
There were a bit of early nerves there, I thought, from the Labor volunteers. They felt that they'd been outnumbered all week, that there were more people taking the Liberal how to vote card and a bit of concern that there weren't as many Labor volunteers as Liberal ones. They did make the observation that the Liberal volunteers weren't locals, but it said something to me that the Liberal Party's putting a lot of resources into this seat, and you could see that at the polling booth. And some concern, I think, from the Labor people that maybe they are a little bit behind at this point in this seat.
And how would you describe the mood nationally in both campaign headquarters at the moment? We know what the public polls are saying. As I mentioned, they all have Labor in front. That really hasn't moved. The momentum's been Labor's way. But what I'm picking up from Liberals is that where they've lost support is to their right flank, to One Nation in particular, and they're pretty confident that will come back in preferences.
They're hoping that will swing back, and I think when you look at what we know about the preferencing with One Nation, is it doesn't necessarily all swing back uniformly, but largely it does. With the Palmer United Party, the spray of votes is a little bit different. I think it's only about 70% flows back, but with One Nation, they're pretty confident that people who are numbering their cards are going to potentially put the Liberal Party ahead of Labor for sure. I think there is a real frustration within the coalition headquarters that the kind of polling they're conducting and how they're looking at seats is telling them a different story to what the published polls are doing. And they're arguing that maybe the way they're conducting their polls is digging further into the community and they're getting a better sense of what a larger spread of voters think, that the published polls are not necessarily able to reach that far. Now, we'll find out next weekend what the reality of that is. But one of the people I spoke to said they thought that some of the polling was wildly out in some seats. It's very hard to do seat-by-seat polling that's accurate, but I think there is a quiet confidence that the quiet Australians are out there.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Bottom line, Peter Dutton may not have had a great campaign and Labor's in front in the published polls, but you get the feeling it's not over yet.
It's that cost of living issue, and I think Peter Dutton has been saying this is the most important week for him. We've been acknowledging, you can't have mistakes this week. It's got to be a really good campaign week with clear air. But if it does boil back down to people, do they feel better off than 3 years ago? And that's the question they're asking as they go into the ballot box. There's this sort of quiet confidence that will help, but I think there's also a lot of disappointment with the way the campaign has been run. And the realities of the campaigning process, that it hasn't been what they'd hoped, and they're not seeing the kind of groundswell that they thought would come from their strategy. And some of that is because of the international overshadowing of this, but also some things the opposition leader has sort of also done in this process. Yeah,
there have been missteps, there have been mistakes, and coalition MPs, talking to them over the last few days, some of them are more critical than others about how it's been run. Look, we're going to get to Mark Butler, the Health Minister, in a moment. Today's announcement from Labor, Bridge, is this new Medicare hotline, 1800 Medicare. What do you think of this idea, a 24/7 hotline you can ring up for health advice? We've had bits of that in parts of the country in the past. How does this one look?
Yeah, it's interesting to see the huge focus on health at this election, because when I've been out in the community, we've been in WA, we've been here in Victoria as well, speaking to a lot of voters, it's come up hugely through our Your Say project at ABC that health is just an enormous part of the cost of living challenge for so many Australians. I think there are a lot of Australians who just want to see or talk to someone quickly. They don't necessarily need to go to a regular GP, because often you can't get a new spot at a GP clinic across Australia. It's really hard to get a new appointment with a regular GP. So perhaps this will appeal to people to say, look, a hotline that I can ring up and speak to a doctor just for things that pop up might be appealing to people. It is shocking to hear of people waiting 2-3 weeks to get an appointment, or even lining up outside those super clinics. So Labor just trying, I guess, to put the message forward that there's these alternative ways to get some health advice and to get a prescription as well.
Yeah, Jason, what do you think of this idea?
Well, I think it's quite catchy. 1800 Medicare, it sticks pretty easily in the mind. It's also not a bad idea for the last week of a campaign. It's a pretty simple concept. I think people will grasp it quickly. My concern would be, is the person really going to be there at the end of the phone line, and will you get onto them very quickly? Because often these things, you end up waiting a long time. You get to somebody, it's hard to sort of explain the issue that you're facing, and is that person at the end of the phone line as reliable as you might want them to be? And compared to a face-to-face meeting, there's some risks there.
It doesn't do much for continuity of care, I would say. That's a big issue.
It's not like the family GP, but Anna, you're not necessarily going to get a free telehealth GP consultation when you ring up this line. You're triaged to determine whether you're going to get one first.
Whether this is the right course of care for you. And I think the problem that GPs raise around these kinds of telehealth health appointments, even though I think there's a lot of acknowledgement that some additional way for people to get a quick answer to know, what is the next step for them is actually really valuable, particularly people with young kids, older people. There's really a lot of need for this in regional areas. 6 weeks to get a GP appointment in some places just shows that the chance to pick up the phone will be really popular. But also there is that concern about the fragmentation of care, people not having a proper medical history for someone on the end of that telehealth appointment to rely upon, and just also the reality that if it's a physical pain that someone has, it's impossible in a telehealth sense to really get a proper assessment of that. But I think that's where this triage process will come in, and I think this is just part of the Labor strategy, the PM holding up the Medicare card, going to the urgent care clinics. This is part of the narrative. This is sort of another piece of the pie.
As Jason says, it comes back to having a consistent theme through the campaign. Let's bring in the Health Minister, Mark Butler, who joins us now. Minister, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us. Let's start on this announcement today, this promise that you're making. Tell us about how this hotline would work.
Well, every Australian will be able to ring a triage nurse 24/7, 365 days a year and get some immediate health advice. That nurse might give you the advice you need to go to a hospital, or you need to go to one of our many Medicare urgent care clinics, or you might be able to be referred to the telehealth GP consult you guys have been talking about after hours. So it'll be available between 6 p.m. and 8 a.m. every day, and fully staffed on the weekends as well. To that point about fragmentation, the difference with some of the private business models that your viewers will be familiar with have cropped up over the last couple of years. First of all, this will be free, completely bulk billed. The second, it will be very high quality. We'll be very determined to make sure the nurses, the GPs are high quality, and it will be looped back in with your general GP, your usual GP, through the My Health Record system. The GP will have access to your My Health Record, so they'll know your medical history by looking at it, and your usual GP will be informed about what comes out of that telehealth appointment, whether it's an emergency script that you need or some other advice about treatment.
When Labor came to office, soon after that, you did cut a number of, about 70, I think, telehealth items, including some specialist items, longer than 20-minute consultations with GPs. This was post-COVID, but the AMA at the time was critical. It said cutting these services was unacceptable. Are you now, in part, just restoring those services?
Well, they were essentially COVID items, so a lot of the COVID apparatus was dismantled after the end of the emergency period of the pandemic. We also got advice that it was important for general telehealth consults to have a connection with your doctor, to have that history that Anna was talking about in front of the person. So we've been working over the last couple of years getting the best possible advice about how you use this new system of telehealth in the most convenient way, but also a high quality way for patients and for doctors. And we think this latest chapter in our comprehensive program to strengthen Medicare rounds out our Medicare Urgent Care Clinic program, which is really for those things that need face-to-face physical consults. And will give, for example, parents real confidence and comfort that if their child wakes up at 3 a.m. on a Saturday night when obviously you can't get in to see your GP, there's someone on the other end of the phone and potentially a video consult who can give you a sense of what you need to do to care for your child.
But to be clear, people who might be thinking, gee, I'd much rather a free, bulk-billed telehealth GP consultation than having to pay $40 or $50 and wait forever to see the GP locally, they won't necessarily get it, will they? As you mentioned, there's a triage, a nurse will triage whether you're going to have the free consultation or not.
Well, this is really operating pretty similar to the principles of urgent care clinics. This is not intended as a substitute for your relationship with your usual GP. This is intended to cover circumstances where people need to be seen immediately. need some quick advice, particularly, for example, when your kid gets sick. So, it's not intended to replace the relationship people have, a really important relationship people have with their usual GP. So if you've got some ongoing health condition, you should go back to your GP, and the triage nurse will tell you that, as the triage nurses at our Medicare urgent care clinics are doing in those very rare circumstances where people are presenting for something that's not really time sensitive or urgent.
So talking about those regular GP visits, I mean, here in McEwan, people are now paying out of pocket, up to and around $50 a visit. It has increased, that out-of-pocket cost, since the last election. You do need more than your Medicare card. People need their credit card quite a lot of the time as well. Will that out-of-pocket cost come down over the next 3 years if you are re-elected?
We're very convinced that our record bulk billing investment that we announced, the Prime Minister and I, several weeks ago, will change things for people. We tripled the bulk billing incentive for pensioners, concession card holders and kids the year before last, and that worked. That stopped the free fall in bulk billing for those Australians, and bulk billing for those Australians is now, again, comfortably over 90%. We want to get back to that rate for people who don't have a concession card, and that's what this latest investment will do. We've calculated this amount very carefully and are confident that for 3/4 of general practices, they will be better off if they move to a fully bulk billing model. Obviously, their patients will be better off, which is our primary concern, but we calculated this to ensure that it was also in the financial interests of general practices to take up this investment.
But there is some doubt about that, as you'd know, from doctors themselves. A team at ABC News did a survey of about 800 GPs. 90% of them said they won't be moving to full bulk billing under this plan that you've put forward. And a survey by the Royal College of GPs also found about 2/3 don't intend to bulk bill more patients. So what do you know that the GPs don't?
Well, look, I know that these doctor groups have right through the history of Medicare resisted this sort of policy. I mean, the doctors' groups did come to me and say they wanted that additional investment in Medicare, but they wanted no strings attached. Now, no government has invested more in general practice than this one, the bulk billing investments, the 3 biggest increases to the Medicare rebate since Paul Keating was Prime Minister, a whole range of other supports for general practice. But as a health minister, particularly as a Labor health minister, I'm determined to get patient outcomes for that. So we did attach strings to this, and I'm very confident over time, as we're seeing with more and more general practices, particularly the bigger ones that are very good at crunching their numbers, that they will recognise this is in their interests. 2 years ago, a fully bulk billing GP was earning about $280,000 a year after they paid their practice fees. That's according to the sector's own earnings calculator. After this November, they'll go from $280,000 to more than $400,000, earning more than a GP who is doing the average amount of charging gap fees. So it is in their interests. I'm confident they'll see that. It's certainly in the interests of patients, and that is my primary focus.
OK, but back to the original question, will out-of-pocket costs for people in a place like McEwan be lower in 3 years from now than they are today?
Well, more people will be getting bulk billed. That's the purpose of this. More people already are getting bulk billed in Victoria than were before we made our first investment in bulk billing. Bulk billing was in free fall when we came to government. We've stopped that free fall, and in every state and territory it started to increase. But it's not increasing enough for my liking and for the liking of most in the community. So that's what this latest investment is about. For those Australians that don't have a concession card, we want their bulk billing rates to be much higher than they currently are. And you'll see that in McEwan, as you will elsewhere in the country.
OK, I want to ask you about urgent care clinics. This has been called the Medi-Scare element of this election campaign. Labor's been saying repeatedly that the coalition is going to shut down urgent care clinics. The coalition have, for the record, said they'll keep existing ones. They're not necessarily supporting the new ones you've promised. Has Labor been misleading on this front?
Look, this is not a term I use. It's a term the media and the Liberal Party like. But what I will say is Malcolm Turnbull was asked this very question last week by the ABC, and he said this. He said, the problem Dutton has is he has form in this area. He has a track record that he must wear. People remember that more than 10 years ago, Peter Dutton looked them in the eye and said there'd be no cuts to health, and then a few months later put a wrecking ball through Medicare, trying to abolish bulk billing, trying to make everyone pay to go to a hospital ED, cutting $50 billion from hospitals.
Okay, and I understand.
I'm not going to be silenced, David, from
Labor's very focused on
about that risk.
I understand Labor's very focused on what happened 10 years ago, but I'm just asking, in the context of this election, is it misleading to say that the Coalition will shut down these urgent care clinics when they've said they will not?
Well, let's talk more recently. For 3 long years since I first announced the urgent care clinic program, it's been bagged uphill and down dale by the Liberal Party. They rejected it when I announced it. They've called it a disaster, a failure. Most tellingly, Angus Taylor has repeatedly said our urgent care investments were wasteful spending that would be on the chopping block at this election. Now, 5 minutes before midnight, just as happened back in 2013, we're supposed to believe that Peter Dutton is now some convert to Medicare rather than what we know about him, which is he's determined to Americanise our healthcare system. Now, people will make their own judgment. They might believe that he's a changed person, in spite of the fact he's never apologised for what he did 10 years ago. We're still having to pay to clean up his mess. My job is to alert people to the risk. There is a risk in giving Medicare back to a man that doctors voted the worst health minister in the history of the system.
But isn't it the same as the Coalition saying Labor will cut negative gearing? They'll remove negative gearing tax breaks because you once argued for that. It's the same sort of claim that's being made, looking at the history of the party rather than what they're actually saying at this election.
We've been very open, honest and transparent about what happened after the 2019 election. We've accounted for that. We've changed our policy and explained to the Australian people all through that process what happened and why we've taken a different
Parties
view now.
can change their positions.
Peter Dutton's never done that. He's never said what he tried to do through Americanising Medicare was a mistake and he would never do it again. He's never been upfront with the Australian people. And until he does that, we are entitled to alert Australians to the risk of putting our most important social program back in the hands of a man voted the worst health minister in the history of Medicare.
Can I ask you about where the money's coming from, given we're in deficit for years to come as far as we can see in the budget? You've got a lot of big spending health measures, whether it's the urgent care clinics, the Medicare bulk billing incentives, the $8.5 billion there. Today's announcement on this hotline. Where is the money coming from? Is it all borrowed?
Well, it's all fully accounted for in the budget. This particular announcement, which we think will cost about $204 million, is an election commitment. That will become apparent in the election costings. But all of the other investments we've made to deliver more doctors, more bulk billing, more urgent care, in women's health, men's health, mental health, they're in PFO. And they're there for people to see. They have been for weeks, and they're fully accounted through a budget process that has already delivered
what does that mean?
Budget surpluses. Well, we're
accounting for with borrowed money?
We're accounting for all of our expenditure and all of our revenue in the way that we've approached the budget over the last 3 years, which has returned $207 billion out of debt, means our interest payments are $60 billion lower, lowering aged care expenditure through the coming 10 years, getting NDIS growth under control for the first time in a long period of time. You know, we have taken a very responsible approach to budget, but there is nothing more important than the health of our nation. And these investments in turning around a decade of cuts and neglect, we think are a priority for the country.
There are, of course, many who say there's nothing more important than defending the nation. Let me ask you about that, just moving beyond your portfolio briefly. Big increase in defence promised by Peter Dutton during the week. Does Labor plan to increase defence spending beyond what's already in the budget?
Well, first of all, let me say in the budget you see the biggest expansion of defence spending in a peacetime period since World War II. $10 billion extra in the forward estimates, $50 billion over the next 10 years. Every dollar accounted for in the budget and every dollar paying for a capability identified in the Independent Defence Strategic Review. It's very different to what you got this week from Peter Dutton, a figure plucked out of air with no indication about where the money's coming from, let alone what it will buy. Now, the Prime Minister has said over the weekend...
I'm just asking about your plans. Will you spend more than what you've put in the budget?
Well, as I was about to say, the Prime Minister has said over the weekend, if, you know, obviously circumstances change, we recognise we're in a very volatile, uncertain global environment, and Defence indicates that more assets are needed, of course we would look at that through a future budget process. But I come back to how we've done this over the last 3 years. When Defence comes to us, the independent strategic review identifies capabilities and assets that need to be bought, then we have put that in the budget. The biggest expansion in peacetime since World War II. You see defence spending growing as a share of the economy or GDP over the forwards and over the 10 years. If more needs to be done, of course the Prime Minister has indicated we're open to doing that.
And you'd find room in the budget by, what, borrowing more or cutting something else?
Well, let's see how those future years roll out. But as I said, at the moment, we've got very substantial growth, the biggest in peacetime years since the end of World War II. But it's to buy identified capability, and that's the important thing. What you saw in the last government, when we came to government, was $42 billion of press releases and announcements that had not a single dollar attached to them in the budget. That's not the approach we've been taking.
Final question, Mark Butler. If on Saturday night we find out that voters have produced a hung parliament at this election, what approach will Labor take?
Well, we'll take the same approach we've taken with the majority, which is putting our vision and our plan for the nation to the parliament. You know, we are pushing very hard for a majority government. We think a majority Labor government will deliver the continuity, the stability, the certainty the country needs in a very volatile global environment, and that's our focus.
I understand that, but I'm just asking, if we get a hung parliament, what will Labor do? Will Labor actually, who will you talk to first?
Well, the Prime Minister, that's a matter for the Prime Minister. He's made it very clear that there are no deals. We're not a party of coalition, unlike the Liberal Party. We'll be putting our plan to the Australian Parliament, whether we have a majority of seats or if we were delivered slightly less than a majority. I mean, that's the Labor way. We have a plan. We're confident it's the right one for the country.
All right, Health Minister Mark Butler, I wish you well for what's left of this campaign. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you, David.
All right, let's come back to our panel, Bridget Brennan, Jason Koutsoukis and Anna Henderson. So I guess a little more detail there about how this hotline will work first up, Anna, but how it fits in, I suppose, with the other health offerings that, as we've said, has been a bit of a theme for Labor in this campaign.
Yeah, and stepping out how this would fit into that and how it would not potentially cut into the role of the GP, which I think is important for Labor to explain more to voters. I mean, as Jason said, the number is it's catchy and it's something that is sticky for voters. I think one of the underlying issues that just continues to mar this area of policy, though, is a shortage of GPs. These are helpful initiatives, but between the shortage of GPs and the pressure on emergency wards, I think there's still workforce issues to try and address here as well.
I want to come to defence, and we'll talk about the coalition's plan, but do you get the sense from what the Prime Minister, Jason, said over the weekend, what Mark Butler said there as well? They're open to spending more if circumstances require it. I mean, circumstances look like they require it, though, don't they?
They do. I mean, I think with defence, there's a lot of big numbers that get thrown around. We're spending nearly $370 billion on AUKUS. And I wonder whether an extra $21 billion for defence that Peter Dutton announced, does that stick in the minds of voters? Because they hear so many other big numbers. I don't think that an extra $21 billion over 5 years is really going to sink into the minds of that many voters. So I think that's a bit of a problem for the coalition there. I also think not defining what you're going to spend the money on is also a problem for them. And that's one of the issues that was identified in the strategic review that this government did. And I think also Peter Dutton looked a bit disorganised when he announced the defence policy during the week. It wasn't the kind of well put together piece of policy that we were expecting from Peter Dutton, who is a former defence minister.
Yeah, well, it came, Bridget, pretty late in the campaign, and yes, the numbers are easy to sort of lose sight of what's what. But I guess in a simple term, the coalition want voters to know they would do more on defence, and they know a lot of people are worried about how things look at the moment and the need to actually do more on defence.
Yeah, I think they want to bring it back to a safe area for them, something that Peter Dutton, as Jason said, feels strong on, feels that it's been, it's been his wheelhouse before. They want to paint this picture that Labor is weak on defence. Labor says it's not, and it's spent, as we just heard from the Minister, has increased spending under this term. But I think Jason's point's really crucial on how this lands with voters, because it was an announcement made when more than 1 million people at that time had already voted. Now we know it's up to, 2.3 million?
2.3 or 4, yeah.
So, are people tuned into these announcements in the final stretch of the campaign, or have they already made up their minds? Also, when you have a look at the data, when you have a look at the Vote Compass data that ABC has, defence actually isn't as high as things like health, as climate change, as the economy, as cost of living. So, for that kind of middle bracket of voters that they need to attract, Gen X voters, millennials, how tuned in are they to defence? And I think just in terms of the social licence, both political parties, I think, need to be clearer about what are the increasing risks? What is the money being spent on? Is it a fear that we're going to be pulled into directly or indirectly into conflicts? Is it in terms of peacekeeping, which has been sort of foreshadowed in Ukraine? I mean, everyone knows that we're in a very volatile situation at the moment. Every morning I wake up on News Breakfast and something else is broken overnight overseas. But I just think the language needs to be clearer. It's very dense, very opaque language often around defence, and I'm just wondering whether there's a large enough proportion of Australians that will be voting on that announcement.
It's a really good point, and it always has to come back to why do we need to spend more on defence, because you're asking all of us as taxpayers to fund it. And in fact, Peter Dutton is saying part of this would be funded through reversing a tax cut, so we'd all pay more tax to have a bigger military. He talked about the potential for conflict over Taiwan. His shadow minister also, very clearly pointed to Donald Trump.
We can't take anything for granted anymore. If there's a lesson out of Ukraine, it's that you've got to be able to stand up on your own 2 feet, at least until your allies can come and support you. And I think with the election of President Trump, America is moving to an America First posture. We still have a strong relationship with the United States, but we can't take anything for granted.
I mean, Anna, I thought that was quite brutally honest from Andrew Hastie. Was he saying that Trump's America is a less reliable ally or a more unpredictable ally?
Yeah, that Australia has to work out how it's going to have its own place in the world, not seen through the prism of being sort of a junior partner to the United States. And I think the counter-argument to the idea that a lot of people have voted and that defence might not be top of mind is that we have had a campaign that has been overshadowed by international events. Prior to the campaign, the Chinese warships circling Australia, the kind of controversy over whether Russia was trying to move into Indonesia with a bigger military presence. And so I think the coalition's view is that a lot of people might just be clicking in to the last week before they actually vote, unless they're early voting. Their view is a lot of early voters have made their mind up and the undecideds are probably holding out. And whether or not as they go in, they're thinking about their safety in the broader community, whether they're in critical marginal seats, maybe have come from other countries that are more volatile or dangerous, and they want to know that Australia is the safe place to live and think that that signal of defence spending is quite important. I mean, we'll have to wait and see, but I think there is a counter view that announcements now could be really important to change undecided voters' minds.
On the coalition policy, so at the moment we spend just over 2% of GDP, of our gross domestic product, on defence. Peter Dutton saying he wants to get that to 2.5% by within 5 years, and then 3% within 10 years. Now, these sort of targets of 3% of GDP, they've become a bit of a international norm. Not all defence experts think this is the best way to decide how much you're going to spend. But look, it's what Keir Starmer is aiming for in the UK, a Labor Prime Minister in the UK. Kim Beazley, the former Labor leader here, says we need to get to 3%. The Albanese government, however, don't like this approach of arbitrary numbers as a percentage of GDP. They say, first work out what you want to buy, what you need for your defence force, and then work out the funding that's required for it. Here was Richard Marles.
They do not nominate a single military capability that this is going to go towards. I mean, there's been no strategic thinking, no strategic direction, no strategic purpose.
And look, that was a fair point. I mean, it wasn't just the lack of a shopping list of, here are the items we want to buy from the coalition. It was, we actually want to have more defence in the north of our country, defending our northern bases, for example. That sort of strategic reasoning as to what they want to do that's different or on top of what the government's already doing. Was that a fair point, do you think?
I mean, there was a lack of an overarching theme. There was a lack of even paperwork to come with the announcement to explain things. We know that the coalition wants to invest in the Joint Strike Fighters, but there is a lot of controversy over whether that's the right area to be even spending money on right now. So I think there is a point to be made there. But there is the counter argument from the coalition, which is that, you know, from an ideological position, they want to say this is how much we care about this area of policy. This is a signal we're sending to other countries about what we intend to do with our military. Yeah. But sort of amorphous concepts like increasing recruitment or increasing industrial capability, I don't think they've really been detailed enough to explain what, you know, I think the calculation is between 2030 and 2035, it'd be an extra $100 billion. It'd become the second largest individual spend in the budget pie. Like, that's enormous money. I think taxpayers probably deserve a bit more detail. Yeah, and it's the one thing that they have said they would buy, which is the extra Joint Strike Fighters. It's interesting, a lot of defence experts, including a couple I spoke to on the podcast this week, so that'd be well down the list of priorities as to what Australia really needs. I had a chat with Jennifer Parker and Professor Peter Dean. Peter Dean co-wrote the Defence Strategic Review a couple of years ago for the government. And look, here's a bit of it. Here's how he sums up how the two parties are lining up when it comes to their defence plans.
The opposition has a bucket of money with no plan, and the government has a plan with not enough money. If you put the two of those things together, if you take the government's plan and the integrated investment plan and you put the coalition's funding against it, I'd have to look at the details in a little bit more, but I think you'd basically actually fund the plan that we have properly.
Yeah, the full conversation you can see there with the QR codes, but I thought well said. One's got the bucket of money, no plan. The other side have got a plan, not enough money. Look, part of this, as I say, would be paid for, according to Peter Dutton, through reversing a tax cut. Speaking of taxes, he had an issue this week when it came to the tax break that's currently there for electric vehicles. Now, Jason, here's what he said earlier in the week, Peter Dutton, at the start of the week. He was asked, are you going to keep this tax break for electric vehicles or not?
Would a coalition government repeal the EV tax break?
No, we've said that what we're opposed to is the government's big tax on hybrids, for example.
And the story ran for a couple of days that, the coalition's going to keep this tax break for EVs. Turns out they're not. What happened there?
Well, I think they probably needed to find some money, extra money perhaps, to fund their defence policy, the extra $21 billion over 5 years. And I think the cost of this EV subsidy is blown out by a significant amount, so there's a big savings measure there that the coalition could take advantage of. But the messaging was clearly muddled. I think Peter Dutton clearly got it wrong when he first said what he said on the Monday. And it was another error from him that he didn't need.
And there have been a few of these moments. Do you think that's being noticed by the electorate, Bridget, these sort of stumbles?
I think so. There's been enough of them where the perception perhaps is that has there been a detailed and disciplined approach to a range of different policy questions. And it just, I think, goes to that question of whether or not he was match fit to be going before the press gallery on a daily basis with a range of different issues and breaking news stories that he'd have to respond to. I think it probably wasn't ideal.
And I think, the Prime Minister's criticism of Peter Dutton has been that he's not ready for government. And mistakes like this really feed into that perception that perhaps Peter actually isn't ready for government. So I think it really does hurt him.
It was coming up even yesterday in conversations. I don't think when people were asked about detail, they said, it's on, the EV tax breaks specifically, but it was just that question of Peter Dutton doesn't seem to be getting his message right. He seems to be making mistakes. So I think it's they're compiling. Yeah.
All right, well, time to talk to the Nationals Senate leader and the Shadow Transport Minister, Bridget Mckenzie, about some of this. The Coalition's big pitch to commuters in this seat of McEwan and seats like it is, of course, this promise to halve fuel excise. Peter Dutton's made many visits to petrol stations to spruik his plan to shave 25 cents a litre off the cost of fuel. But guess who pays no fuel excise at all? Well, electric vehicle drivers, of course. Bridget Mckenzie has been critical in the past of the government for not introducing a new system to include them, a system of road user charging. And about 6 months ago on this program, she said she was working on a policy to unveil before the election.
I'm actually actively developing our low emissions transport policy right now, and I'll have more to say closer to the election.
And Bridget Mckenzie joins us here at beautiful Hanging Rock.
How gorgeous is my backyard?
It's not bad at all. It's not bad at all. No, it's wonderful to be here. Look, just on that, you've talked in the past about road user charging and having a low emissions transport policy to bring to this election. Can you tell us what it is?
Well, Spearsy, we've been really clear about the EV exemption for fringe benefit tax. We don't think it's fair that people that live in places like Donnybrook and McEwan are subsidising those that can actually afford to purchase an electric vehicle. And the other issue with the increase in electric vehicle drivers is that they're not contributing to our road task. And you wouldn't, driving out from the CBD today or yesterday, you would have seen the state of our roads. So we need to make sure we've got a systems for roads funding that ensures that everyone that drives on the road, from our truckies to passenger vehicles, makes a contribution to that.
So how do you do that?
With the looking at how do we actually reduce emissions more broadly, well, we are, aside from assuming we've got equity in terms of how we treat the cars that people need and love to drive, making sure our rail network is up to scratch, continuing to commit to the inland rail to get those hundreds of thousands of big trucks off our roads in terms of the freight task. That's going to have a significant impact on emissions reduction. I think it's 750,000 tonnes of CO2 as a result of getting those trucks off the roads, making sure that our Regional Australia Future Fund, the $20 billion future-proofing for regional funding, will be investing in manufacturing in the regions, including biofuels and the like. So a raft of measures to actually decrease emissions whilst ensuring that we're not assuming that low to middle income earners in this country that are driving petrol and diesel cars are effectively subsidising those that can afford to purchase an electric vehicle.
And I'll come back to that inland rail issue as well, but just on this idea of, you're right, electric vehicle drivers don't pay fuel excise, they don't contribute through that way to the roads. Would you introduce road user charging?
Well, we're not proposing any new taxes under a Dutton Little proud government, that's very clear. But what the High Court made very clear in its finding was that state governments need to work together with the national government to actually deal with what was a very poor attempt by the state Labor government here in Victoria to attach effectively a road user charge for Victorian drivers. So Jim Chalmers has really dropped the ball on that.
So what would you do?
He's had Treasurer meeting after Treasurer meeting, and they've done nothing. And what we've had to do is step into the breach with significant billions of dollars of road funding commitments, because the appalling state of our roads is affecting productivity in terms of our freight supply chains, but also safety.
OK, but to be clear, would you talk to the states, if you're in government, about a road user charging system instead of fuel excise?
Well, what we've made very clear is that everyone that uses our roads should contribute to actually making sure they're maintained to the appropriate standard.
Through road user charging?
Well, Spearsy, that's what the High Court actually asked Treasurer Chalmers to do, to work with the state governments to do that, and he's done nothing.
No, so would you do it?
We're going to make sure that everyone who's using the roads contributes to the funding of the roads.
Through road user charging?
Well, we also use the fuel excise. As you know, that's going to be a declining source of revenue over time if people continue to move out of petrol and diesel vehicles into EVs.
Can you get EV drivers to pay fuel excise somehow? How would you do that?
Well, these are the challenges, and I think that's the issue, that you actually got the double whammy for those who are on low and middle income earning. They're typically people that are driving petrol and diesel cars. They're paying fuel excise.
So how do you get EV drivers to contribute? That's what I'm still confused about.
Well, I think when we get into government, that is something we'll have to look at. But the reality is that under the Labor Party, they're not contributing, the roads are deteriorating, and what the Labor Party is expecting is low and middle income earners in seats like McEwan, in seats like Hawke, in seats like Bendigo here in Victoria are effectively subsidising wealthier individuals in Kooyong, in Brighton and other areas who can afford to pay an EV, and we don't think that's fair.
You'll find
and that's why we didn't agree with the fringe benefit tax exemption. We've been really clear on that, and we want to make sure that Australians have choice.
Okay, but you'll find a way in government to make the EV drivers contribute to pay.
Well, we think everybody who is using the roads in this great country of ours needs to contribute to their maintenance.
You just haven't worked out how.
And that includes our trucking industry as well, who also pay effectively a road user charge.
Look, you do want to make diesel utes cheaper and somehow, removing this tax break would make EVs more expensive. And
the real cost.
And find a way somehow.
Instead of giving them a tax break, are we going to make people pay the real cost?
And you want them to pay somehow for fuel excise or a road user charge?
Well, currently they're driving for free.
Okay, so you'll find a way to make them pay?
Well, everyone who uses the road, Spearsy, should pay for its maintenance. It's a pretty simple concept of equity.
Okay. I just wanted to ask you more generally about climate, though. You also want fewer renewables built. You want to end some offshore wind. You want to stretch out the life of coal-fired power as well. Is there anything you would do to bring down emissions in the next 10 years?
Well, under the coalition government, we did actually see emissions dropping. Unfortunately, emission reduction has flatlined under the Labor Party. That is the reality of Anthony Albanese. And his renewable push is really roughshod riding over private property rights, not just of those of us that live in the regions. Just to the west of here, in V&I West, they had their private property rights and their right to appeal against developments on their own property removed by the Labor Party here in Victoria. You've got offshore wind developments, which have only been able to have the 60-day minimum legislative consultation requirement, and you're seeing communities all across the country that are being subjected to these policies stand up and say, steady on, like bring us with you on this journey instead of trashing our communities.
Understand your concerns
and driving
about
up the price of energy as well.
So if you do all of that, is there anything you would do to bring down emissions, or would emissions go up?
I'll tell you what we're going to do to bring down emissions. We're going to do what the IPCC has said we should do to bring down emissions, and that's increase nuclear power generation across the globe.
But that's more than 10 years away.
Well, it's up, we're hoping we'll open our first one within close to a decade. And in the meantime, we're going to bring on gas, lower emission fuel than coal, and actually ensure that we can keep the lights on, keep industrial jobs here at home, and keep downward pressure on prices. Because when you increase the network charge, David, you increase the price of the bill, and 28,000 kilometres of new transmission lines to connect Chris Bowen's fantasy into where it's needed in the capital cities. 28,000 additional kilometres of transmission lines is going to drive up the network charges for everyday Australians.
So nuclear is central to the plan.
Absolutely.
Why hasn't Peter Dutton been to any of the nuclear sites in this campaign?
Well, I would ask the same question of Chris Bowen, who you can't find him near an offshore wind.
Nuclear.
You can't find Chris near an offshore wind site. Like, send him to the Illawarra, please. He'd be lucky to get out,
But for your part, can you understand why he hasn't been to a nuclear site?
Well, Peter's been really positive about, we are very proud to be the generation that's actually made the tough decision, made the really ambitious visionary goal, not just to get to net zero by 2050, but to power our country and make us energy secure into next century.
He just hasn't been to talk to the locals who'll have to host
I love that we're focused on this. So the Shadow Minister, Ted O'Brien, has been to all sites, some multiple times. I've spoken to these MPs who are telling me that their communities are excited about the potential. They're on pre-poll. It's not being raised. These are highly energy literate communities who are looking forward to the opportunity of this type of investment in their community. And I find it fascinating that those who don't live in and amongst us and who aren't from these types of communities think it's such an appalling plan, but we're very, very happy to have our backyards and communities carpeted with solar panels, with wind towers and transmission lines, because it wasn't in their backyard. But the minute we say, let's have a net zero solution that actually is going to give us build our local economies
think
and
the
power
locals-
our nation into next century, and suddenly we've got all the lovies saying no thank you.
You think the locals really want these nuclear plants?
Absolutely. If they didn't, what I do know about country communities is you're never left wondering about what they think, David. And I've spoken to Darren Chester, Cole Boyce, to those up in Lithgow.
Have you seen the polls in these local communities?
It hasn't been raised at pre-poll.
Okay.
I'm just.
Well, you would know the concern in a lot of regional areas, including regional Victoria, is about the water that's going to be required for nuclear. And you know this has been raised with your leader, David Littleproud, as well. It was raised at the press club the other day. The site that you want to build a nuclear plant, the Loy Yang A site in Gippsland, AGL plans to use their water entitlement for the next 70 years there, or through to 2070. Where would the water come from for nuclear?
Well, David, the University of New South Wales has done a study into this, says our water capacity is not a constraint in developing a nuclear industry here in Australia. They are the experts. We've also made it clear and a guarantee to our communities that there will be no increase in water entitlements for nuclear power generation.
So
we will not be taking water from the consumptive pool. And the next generation nuclear, which we're planning to build, uses less water in terms of cooling systems as well. So on every
there is a new technology, I think there's one of them in the world that uses less water, but they're really expensive, far more than you've modelled under the Frontier modelling.
Well, David, we've made it really clear, no water taken out of the consumptive pool. We will be the coal-fired power plants where these nuclear power stations will be positioned, have existing water entitlements, and what we build will use the water that's available there locally.
So those really expensive nuclear plants, that'll cost more than the Frontier modelling suggests.
David, let's not jump into Labor's scare campaign. They've been running around saying $600 million. It's not $600 million. And we need to stop
$600 billion is the figure they used, but I wasn't using that.
Billions.
I was just pointing to the fact that these waterless nuclear plants, or the ones that use less water, are a lot more expensive than the ones that Frontier model.
Well, I'm going to trust the experts. So the University of New South Wales paper makes it categorical that water constraints are not a bottleneck for us actually developing those facilities. And I tell you what, the communities there are excited about, having next generation, high-paid, tech-savvy jobs locally. And what we've seen around the globe, when you build these type of facilities in regional communities, there is a significant economic benefit with manufacturers, etc., that come to these communities. So we're excited about what this is going to build in regional
Let me come back to a couple of regional issues, including in your portfolio. Inland rail, you mentioned earlier. What is your plan for inland rail? Do you want it to finish in Brisbane or Gladstone, or where do you want it to finish?
We want to get it to Brisbane Port first and foremost, and we're very excited that a change in state government in Queensland has meant that conversation to get the inland rail north of North Star, where it's currently stopped, is actually now a reality. So if we get the great privilege to hold the transport policy post the election, getting moving on the inland rail is something we're focused on.
Are you going to fund it to get to Brisbane Port?
We are going to fund the inland rail to get finished and completed. It's already driving an economic boom in the communities where it's operating and where it's being built, and we're just going to keep going because the corridor of commerce that we envisaged occurring is absolutely happening right now on the ground. If you look at somewhere like Parks and beyond, really booming as a result of that investment.
I don't think it's funded to Brisbane though at the moment. What would that cost?
No, it's not. So Kerry Schott did a review under the government. She recommended some governance changes to the ARTC, which have been completed and are actually working, which we support. She estimated the cost to be under $31 billion, and so we're running with that operating cost as she's the latest one to have done some work.
But then to get to Brisbane, though, would be...
She's actually done the work.
What would that cost to get to there?
Well, we need to work with the Queensland government.
Billions more, though.
So there's a few steps, David.
Okay, but you're committed
we've got
to that.
Get the transport portfolio.
And then find the billions.
And then actually, currently, Catherine King's got it focused south.
Yeah.
And obviously...
You'd go to Brisbane.
We think you can do... The Inland Rail project is a variety of subset of projects, and we think you can walk and chew gum at the time, so we'll be looking at
going all the way. Okay, good to clear that up. You were also critical of Labor for pulling money out of dams funding when they came to government, including the Hell's Gate Dam. Would you restore that?
Well, we're going to have a water policy that secures our future. You can't pour over 1.2 million additional people into the country and not actually secure water. We don't just need it to grow food, we need it to actually support population growth.
So is the Hellsgate Dam back?
A range of dams projects that Perrin Davey has been securing around the country have been announced. We're also got, as I said, the Regional Australia Future Fund, which is going to give $1 billion worth of additional funding into the regions for a variety of economic projects, including water projects.
Okay, but the Hellsgate Dam, would that happen?
I'd have to check exactly on the Hellsgate Dam specifically, but I know our side of politics has backed water infrastructure, whereas the Labor Party has made it a signature of theirs to effectively give a funding drought into rural and regional Australia. They've cut $10 billion of regional programs in their very first budget, cut and delayed in excess of $30 billion of infrastructure projects around the country. So when you're sitting in rural and regional Australia under Anthony Albanese, you're not feeling the love at all, and I think we're hearing that loudly and clearly in the ballot box.
A couple of other issues just finally. One, again, a big issue for regional Australia and the Nationals, working holiday visa holders. They're vital for picking fruit, other agricultural jobs, but also working in a lot of local
Tourism,
businesses,
yes,
all of that.
here in Hanging Rock.
Would the Coalition cut the number of working holiday visas under your plans to slash migration?
No, so we've made it really clear that we are cutting permanent migration by 25%, that exempting parent visas, but that'll be spread obviously across the skilled and the family permanent migration.
So no cuts to working holiday visa numbers?
Well, then you've got the not permanent visas, so working holidays. We absolutely need those backpackers out in our regions. Tourism, hospitality, and indeed the agricultural tasks.
Would you cut that number?
No, we're not cutting that number.
No cuts to working holiday
International
visas.
students, absolutely cutting that number. So we'll be cutting that by 30,000 each and every year.
Are the Liberals aware of your position on that?
That's contributing to our housing crisis.
Are the Liberals aware that the Nationals are drawing a line on working holiday visa holders?
Well, the Coalition has made it really clear that we're dropping the permanent migration numbers from 185,000
but I think you're the
down
first
to 140,000.
I know that, but you're the first to make it clear working holiday visa holders aren't to be touched.
We've made it clear that we're slashing permanent migration by 25%.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So permanent visas, David, are, the family visa class and the skilled migration class. Parental visas are going to be exempt from this cut, and the 25% will be taken from skilled. What we're not going to do is allow the CFMEU to control our skilled migration list.
But Peter Dutton's not said what you've just said, which is now good to have it clear that you won't touch the working holiday visas.
No, we need a skilled workforce, David, but what the Labor Party's essentially done is brought in yoga teachers instead of construction workers. We need to get... So when we look down the road here, where you cannot... move for love nor money. You've got Cloverton, which is going to be the size of Canberra within a decade. And as as your panel has been saying this morning, the pressures here in this seat are significant. Yeah. Cutting the permanent migration is important. Making sure we get tradies in the skilled migration list is also important to actually build the houses, and that's something the Labor Party refuses to do because the CFMEU is controlling the skilled migration
And a
list.
final question for you, again, a regional issue, but more so in WA, critical minerals. This is a potentially huge new industry for Australia, and we know your WA Nationals colleague, Mia Davies, who's running in Bullwinkle, supports what Labor's doing when it comes to production tax credits for critical minerals. This week, the Prime Minister said that he would have a stockpile of critical minerals as well that the government would help pay for. Some of your colleagues don't like the idea. Peter Dutton sort of said maybe we do it in government. What do you think?
I think to have a downstream processing plant, you've got to actually get the minerals out of the ground. Yeah. Right now, we've got investment in our resources industry going offshore because it is too hard to get the projects up. If you go and talk to miners large and small in WA, it is being wrapped up in red and green tape. You've got the Labor Party committing to reintroduce their environmental suite of laws that will make it harder to get resource
But
projects
do we need a stockpile
open.
of critical minerals?
So it's one thing to talk about we're going to back the processing of critical minerals at some future point in time. If you can't get them out of the ground because you've wrapped up in red and green tape, it's a joke.
But do we need
we want to support getting the projects up and going instead of Labor, and this is the key for WA. Anthony Albanese is anti-mining, anti-live sheep and anti the resource industry and wants to unionise the Pilbara.
Okay.
So on any measure, it's going to be harder to get projects up in the West, and that means much needed investment is going to go offshore, and with it, the jobs and that very nice little resource relief we get that every treasurer loves to bank.
Bridget Mckenzie, thank you for joining us here at Hanging Rock.
Always a pleasure, and thanks for coming.
It's been a treat. Thank you so much. Good luck with the rest of the campaign.
Thanks, mate.
Talking of critical minerals, I just want to show you what the Prime Minister and the opposition leader had to say on this during the week.
Obviously, what it does is enable us to use our national power that we have. We have everything that is on the periodic table, including the 31 critical minerals that have been identified. It's important that be used to serve our national interests. It's just part of what we have worked towards.
We're not supporting the government's plan because it's just a reheat and a rehash and a re-announcement but no delivery. But critical minerals are absolutely essential for us and for our partners, and whether that looks like an offtake agreement or whether it looks like an agreement to stockpile or to work with the US and the UK and Japan, etc., we'll work all of that detail out in government.
Let's bring our panel back in. We're joined once again by Bridget Brennan, Jason Koutsoukis and Anna Henderson. Look, just picking up on critical minerals there, Anna, it sounds like there are a few things that would be worked out in government, including this question of whether the coalition would have some sort of stockpile of critical minerals that the Prime Minister's promised.
I think this is an area where the coalition wants to see itself as separate. It doesn't want to be backing in sort of Labor's plan here. It wants to have its own plan. It doesn't necessarily think that this is something that voters potentially more on the East Coast are as exercised about, sending signals to the West, but not wanting to... there has to be some product differentiation from the coalition's point of view, and this is one area where they don't want to be backing in a Labor plan. They want to have their own plan. There were some mixed messages around this from the coalition during the week. Susan McDonald seemed to be saying different things in the same interview, sort of rejecting the proposal.
She didn't support a stockpile, and then it was pointed out, well, Peter Dutton says maybe you will, and she said, OK, well, maybe we will.
It's an awkward moment as the Shadow Minister. But I think generally there is a sense in the coalition they want to have their own proposal to put. Whether or not people are willing to accept that's not something we'll hear about now is still to come. Yeah,
just to pick up on something we heard from, or a couple of things we heard from Bridget Mckenzie. First on immigration, working holiday visa holders. The Nationals, and apparently the coalition, aren't going to touch them. I think there were 63,000 last year that came in. It's the second highest number of temporary migrants after foreign students. But the Nats are clear, don't touch that number. We haven't heard that from the Liberals, have we?
And this is part of the problem, I think, with the migration policy more generally, is that we haven't really had a day or a moment where the coalition has said, we are now going to tell you about what we are doing in the migration space. It's been piecemeal breadcrumbing throughout the campaign. There's still a lot of things that aren't clear. And so, I mean, it just feels like policies being made as we go.
Well, how do they get the 100,000 cut in net overseas migration if they're not touching working holiday visa holders? They've told us what the foreign student reduction would be, but if you're not touching working holiday visas, I don't know how you get the 100,000 cut.
It's the skilled visa section that seems to be in their sights, and then it must be certain elements of the skilled visa section. I think it's a problem for them that they haven't been able to explain how they're doing it, or they haven't wanted to. I don't think we're going to get that before the election.
It is a sensitive one for the Nats. But the other thing I thought was interesting was road user charging. This has been talked about for years and years. And fuel excise, it is a problem. I think it's a fair point Bridget Mckenzie raises that we haven't seen this government really, get cracking with transforming the way we fund our roads and moving to road user charging. Bridget, if more people are buying electric vehicles and driving electric vehicles, they're not paying fuel excise. But who's going to bite the bullet and go to a different system?
Yeah, it's a good question, David. I mean, the fuel excise campaign, though, that the coalition is running, I think is going to be really, really potent in areas like this one. I've been driving around Victoria for quite a bit over the last month. Those massive blue signs are everywhere along highways that need additional investment that are riddled with potholes. It is this really, really serious issue. And perhaps the government hasn't been as strong on this issue as what the coalition has. It is one of their policies that has a clear line. It's got a clear slogan. It's being seen everywhere here in Victoria. I don't know about other states. I haven't travelled it as much, but I do think it'll be a vote winner in parts where people feel that hasn't been.
And you can understand the Nat saying we want EV drivers to pay their fair share. It's not going to go down necessarily well in those teal seats that Peter Dutton's going to start visiting this week, Jason.
Well, I think it's also, it's Bridget talking about another tax, and this has been one of these jarring things about this campaign is that we've got, we saw in the news poll on Monday that more voters think that Labor is better at cutting taxes than the coalition. This is a core area for the coalition.
It's usually the other way around.
Exactly, and I think, so this is a big problem, and if they're talking about another charge here for a different class of vehicle owners, and they're obviously not going to like that. And I don't think the coalition's really thought this through very well in terms of who's going to pay for what.
Let's move on to a couple of other policy fronts. We heard this week a bit on domestic violence. We spoke about it a bit on the show last week, and then this week we saw the coalition announce a few things, including a new national register of domestic violence offenders that the Shadow Attorney General says would help police and other agencies know who they're dealing with.
People move around this big country. This is all about knowledge and ensuring that police and the relevant agencies have the knowledge and the information they need to make their decisions.
And from Labor, look, most of their policy measures were announced before the campaign last year. In fact, there was bipartisan support for $4.7 billion in measures, particularly aimed at frontline legal services. Katie Gallagher was pointing to that during the week.
This is all work that we have underway. It's either being implemented or is part of our next approach. And I would hope, that there are, traditionally this has been an area, I think, where there has been largely bipartisan support. It's a national crisis.
I think Labor did announce a further plan to have ankle bracelets on high-risk offenders. Bridget, what have you made of the debate over domestic violence, the new offerings, and I guess the prominence it's been given or not been given in the campaign?
It's barely had any prominence, and I think that's such a missed opportunity because we know so many Australian women are concerned about women being injured or murdered in their areas. We're seeing this. It's huge on my algorithm, for example, among millennial women especially, who are just devastated, feel a lot of grief around this issue. I don't see why either major party couldn't have put this up the front of the campaign. I mean, as we've discussed, a lot of people have already voted. Peter Dutton did quite an emotive press conference in Hobart this week with Karen Little, who has had a lot of personal experience of domestic violence and spoke quite well on this issue. I mean, Katie Gallagher certainly said in our program she doesn't want to be seeing, of course she doesn't want to be seeing the amount of women murdered that we are seeing. But when you talk to frontline services, they say there is still just a distinct lack of investment in those frontline services, particularly for legal services that see a lot of the women who are in danger in Australia right now. So they feel frustrated, and I think we're having focuses on other areas like housing, like cost of living. All these issues play into the safety of women and children in Australia, and just would have been nice to see both of the campaigns lift this issue at the front of the campaign.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, and particularly given it is a national crisis, as we keep being told, as we know it is.
There's been a national cabinet held on it, we've heard throughout the term. The sad thing is that it becomes an issue when there is a high-profile death and when there isn't, even though we know that women are dying on a weekly basis. It's just not gaining the prominence. Part of that is possibly to do with the fact that there is a level of bipartisanship around the measures. But I think when you still hear the advocacy groups at this point in the campaign, after these additional announcements have been made saying there is no long-term housing proposal and funding proposal that really steps out for us how we're going to address this problem, all the while coronial inquests are unfolding, court cases are unfolding, the community is feeling the impact of this. You'd think that the two political parties might have decided to make it a bigger feature on a weekly basis of this campaign.
Just a couple of other things too. There was a really disturbing moment on ANZAC Day in Melbourne at the dawn service where we had a prominent neo-Nazi and some other white supremacists booing the welcome to country. Then the audience started to cheer. It was condemned by both Peter Dutton and Anthony Albanese, and it was notable that they were both saying, welcome to country is important. Bridge, what did you make of that?
Deeply distressing. It was a deeply distressing moment. It was a line in the sand for Australia to see a dawn service interrupted by neo-Nazis, to see a proud Aboriginal man, his speech, to actually welcome people, to actually offer a generous hand to say, this is my story, welcome here, we all share this story, and we all share this land. To see that interrupted was really tragic. I know it's affected me, it's affected a lot of Aboriginal people around the country. I know there are elders around the country who are considering not giving welcomes to country at the moment. Mark Brown stood in his power as a black man, continuing his speech in front of a largely non-Indigenous crowd. I can tell you that's a really intimidating thing to do. But it just goes to show how the political climate and the social climate has changed, because he gave a similar speech last year at the dawn service in Melbourne. He spoke last year and wasn't interrupted. Now, the
Why do you put that down to the change? Look, is it the Trump arrival and how that's changed politics? Or?
There are a number of factors, but another issue that hasn't been discussed on the campaign at all is the aftermath of the 2023 Voice campaign. Now, I can tell you that there is a lot of hostility and racism and abuse being put forward to Aboriginal people across the country right now. It's not being spoken about. We know it, we see it, we feel it, but it's not really being addressed by politicians. I mean, it's been this kind of awkward silence after the referendum about how we actually go and reach out to Indigenous people who were really badly affected by the type of campaign that we saw run in 2023. It's not just anecdotal, because if you speak to 13 Yarn, which is the national crisis and hotline for Indigenous people in Australia, they can see an uptick in racism and abuse. There are regional towns, larger towns where elders and young people and all sorts of First Nations people are feeling this. So there just is this silence around this. We also have seen politicians question whether the welcome to country industry is a multi-million-dollar industry, whether people are being welcomed to their own country.
And Peter Dutton's spoken about not standing in front of an Indigenous flag should he be Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Does that feed into this as well?
If you talk to some large-scale Aboriginal organisations, they think so. I don't want to put my own view out there, but I mean, I think there's just a question over whether or not we are seeing now in Australia a global rollback of Indigenous respect and rights that we've seen in other nations like New Zealand and in the United States as well.
Look, just finally, we're into the final week, Jason. We were at early voting yesterday. It's all about how to vote cards. You don't have to follow the how to vote card to remind people. You can make your own choice on preferences, but they do matter. And we've seen One Nation and the Coalition, apparently not a deal, but they are preferencing each other a lot more than they have previously. What's the significance of this?
Well, I think it's very interesting, because obviously when Pauline Hanson first made that big splash in Australian politics in the late 90s. The Coalition was very upfront about putting them last, and they put One Nation last for quite a long time. Now we're seeing the Coalition sort of put them at number 2 and preferencing them openly. And I think it does show that I think the Coalition has moved much further to the right than they were perhaps 25 years ago. I do think, though, that less people take any notice of these, or less people take notice of the how to vote card. I think only about a third of people now are following the ticket. And so, yeah, how to votes matter less, but there certainly has been a big change in the way the Coalition does treat One Nation.
Yeah, as one of the volunteers was telling us yesterday, a lot of people grab them on the way in and then just leave them on a recycling table as they walk in to cast their ballot and don't necessarily follow them. Anyway, it's entirely up to you what your preferences are going to be. Our panel, Bridget Brennan, Jason Koutsoukis and Anna Henderson, back in a moment with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm photographer Mike Bowers. I'm talking pictures this morning with Cathy Wilcox, cartoonist for the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, and a very warm welcome, Cathy.
Good morning, Mike.
Second last week of the campaign, and the opposition leader was getting all defensive.
Yep.
He sort of waited till the last moment, didn't he?
There seems to be a sort of a haphazard feel somewhat about the policy. So here we are. What have we got? Harry Bruce. Locked on, and there he is. Dutton's in the defence policy plane and breaking other big guns, Peter.
Yep, these would be Pete-seeking missiles. Lovely David Rowe, who's got Peter Dutton and Andrew Hastie in the tank.
It's a harsh one, isn't it? With Peter popping out the top, you don't think we're being a little too muscular? Andrew Hastie there.
The driver is here.
Wah, 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 wah.
Well, the polls are tanking. aren't they?
They are looking down, that's for sure. And there's something about this campaigning which Dutton's there with his idea, yes, I can really imagine how this is going to go. He delivers it, and then somebody asks him a question back and it all falls to pieces.
Yeah, Johannes Leek has drawn Peter Dutton here in the Half Bakery. What's he say?
Come and get it, or not. Whatever. He's having a little snooze behind the counter there.
Specials, pies in the sky, policy turnovers, ham-fists. It was all roads lead to Rome, as the death of Pope Francis seemed to halt the actual campaigns for a while.
It casts everything else in a different sort of light, you know.
It sort of made our politics look even smaller than it can be. When you've got a campaign that straddles both Easter and ANZAC Day with no separation, it was always going to be a circuitous route to the finish line. And Brett Lethbridge has picked up on that, the start and finish around tariffs and Easter and Pope and ANZAC Day.
The obstacle course.
Yeah. As soon as the news broke that the Pope Francis had died, both leaders made a pilgrimage. The Prime Minister went to St Patrick's in Melbourne, and Peter Dutton went to St Mary's in Sydney. I guess the imagery is really important.
Absolutely, and I think that that by and by they saw the moment for what it was.
Trump said that he was looking forward to going to a funeral.
You know, he can hit the right note, can't he?
Definitely walks to the beat of his own drum.
As here in this cartoon, somebody speaking the tribute to Pope Francis here, he believed in social justice, inclusion, welcomed refugees, LGBTQI plus people, decried wealth inequality, spoke out on Gaza and Ukraine, called for urgent action on climate change, and
dangerous woke green commie extremists.
That's what he said to the bishop in the church service, Marion Buddy, who took it up to him.
Gave him a little lecture at the start. Peter Dutton hasn't had the best of campaigns, but I think he's hoping some of these last-minute policies will put him back in pole position.
Look, he's really brainstorming there. Look, I don't want to panic, but we've less than 2 weeks to turn this around.
The boss says not to worry. He's onto it.
Let's see now. Power prices, public servants, pedophiles, Pizzulo.
Well,
I reckon we're good to panic.
I did love this Matt Golding. I will keep you safe.
Yikes. Shudder, shudder, shudder. Sound of teeth clattering.
Fiona Koutsoukis. So Jenny here says they all smell like desperation, but does anyone else have a preference? Liberal focus group possible slogans?
Drugs and thugs?
Yeah.
Crime and slime?
Yeah.
Wokes and hoax?
Yeah. Wedge and sledge.
Wedge and sledge. It's like a high school classroom, actually, doesn't it? So with these people in various positions of agony.
An election isn't a popularity contest, Cathy, but it is about where you put your preferences, and there's always debate about who preferences what, why, when and how. Mr Brolman seems to think that opposition leader has swapped orange for orange. He's changed his preferences.
And the other orange one on the rise, Pauline.
Yep, Trump light.
A beautiful thing. It feels like it's a bit late in the piece that she's turned up.
It's been a great pleasure unpicking the events of this penultimate week. I'll let you do the honours.
All right. Thanks for having me, and it's back to you, David.
Thank you, Cathy. Thank you, Mike. Let's get some final observations with our panel. Bridget.
I'm sure those seats we're all watching closely as we head to Saturday, but Wannon to our west and southwest is really one to watch. Of course, the independent Alex Dyson, running for a third time, has a massive army of volunteers. It's becoming a much more diverse seat, covering a lot of areas along the southwest coast and into Western Victoria. But I am hearing this week the Liberals are sending in a lot of resources to try and sandbag that seat for Dan Tehan.
One to watch. Jason.
I think it's been a very civil campaign. We often hear voters complaining that politics gets more nasty each election, but I think this campaign has shown that the leaders of all the parties can show a lot of respect to each other, and Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton have been very careful to show that towards each other especially, and I think that's been quite refreshing.
Maybe it's because they're spending all this time together with all these debates. It's a good point. Anna.
Look, with all the polling caveats, Redbridge has been tracking the non-English speaking voter sentiment across Australia and has found since the rise of Donald Trump, there's been a 10% swing towards Labor. If migration ends up being a big issue that is seen as a misjudgment by the coalition in this election, expect it to be one of the early chapters their review, I think.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you all very much for joining us here. This beautiful setting of Hanging Rock. We're going to grab a warm cup of coffee to warm up, but really appreciate you being here in the seat of McEwan, and thanks to all the crew for making this happen as well. Finally, more than 2 million Australians have already cast their ballots in this election, but the Prime Minister managed to find the one early voting centre with virtually no one there. We'll leave you with that. Thanks for watching.
Get away the punters. There were punters here. Funnily enough, when 60 people charged through with equipment, it's kind of...
I'll take my pair.
There you go. Vote Labor.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.